This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Herzog Foundation.
Hey! Time for school!
Hey, School Success Makers. Welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. I'm joined by a good friend out of Salem Springs, Arkansas, Mr. Kyle Rapinchuk, who is the head of school of 𝑠ℎ𝑒𝑒𝑟 Classical Academy. I've known him from the few times I've gone up to the Ozarks when he used to work up there, and we went to the College of the Ozarks, went to a conference, and he always spoke. And anytime he spoke, I always felt dumb because I was like, man, he knows way more than I do. And so I always have learned a lot from Kyle, and he's really brought scripture to life and the Bible to life. He is so well talented and versed in that. So I thought, man, we got to have this guy on the podcast finally so you guys can learn as well. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to him to introduce himself. So Kyle, welcome to the podcast today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mitchell. It's good to be here. Always enjoy being in person with you more, but it's nice to see your face and glad to be on the podcast. So, yeah, as you shared with your listeners, was at College of the Ozarks for 12 years. That's where we met. I was running a classical Christian education conference while teaching at School of the Ozarks. I was the upper school Bible, worldview, theology, and great books, kind of all of the above. For those 12 years, and also the upper school curriculum director and lead teacher. And just felt the Lord kind of pushing me in some ways towards administration, have a pastoral heart and calling. And so wanted to see how academic leadership and pastoral calling could come together. And so when this position at 𝑠ℎ𝑒𝑒𝑟 Classical Academy came up, went ahead and pursued that, and the Lord opened some doors. And so we accepted the job last year. Moved down here in May, started June 1st, and we are rocking and rolling in year one here.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you followed the call of the Lord on your life and got down there. And it sounds like, from what I've found, it's going very good. It's going smooth. And I'll have to share this really quick. I won't make it a long story, but just a funny story. So over the summer, my wife and I and our son were going through. So Kyle knows the story, but we were going through. We were RVing on an RV trip, and we were in. Oh my goodness, Glacier? Was it Glacier? Teton? I can't remember now where it was. We were in one of the national parks. And so we're at camping. We found this random few families. My son was started playing with their kids, and we're like, oh, okay, well, we'll go say hi to them and find, where are you guys from? Arkansas. I was like, oh, that's cool. And so then they started talking about where they were from, like close by. I go, oh, it's by the Ozarks. And they're like, oh yeah. And I said, oh, I've been to the Ozarks, College of the Ozarks. And they go, well, do you know Kyle Rapinchuk? I go, oh yeah, I don't like that guy. Who is he? And they're like, no, I'm just kidding. But they were like, oh, he's our new head of school. And my mind, lit up. I go, oh my goodness, I know exactly who you guys are, because he's posted about this on LinkedIn. And so smallest world ever. We're in the middle of nowhere, like Montana, or no, that was outside of
Wyoming, maybe.
I don't. Yeah, it was Jackson, because we were out of Jackson, the whole area. Yeah. And what a small world. Ran into some of his board members and families at a random campground in Wyoming. And we talked about classical education and just schools in general. And so I was like, well, you guys got a winner for a head of school. So good pick, good decision. And that was fun. So I messaged Kyle on Facebook right after that. I was like, I just met your board. That's so cool. So
that was a random text to get.
I'm sure you freaked you out a little bit too. Maybe like, what were they saying about me? But it was all good.
What did you say about me?
All good things.
All good things. Thanks, Mitchell.
I said, man, you stole a good one from School of the Ozarks, is kind of what I said. So I said, you're good. Well, I always start, before we dive into all the nitty gritty of what we have scheduled for today to talk about, I always love to start with the same question. And it is, if I was to ever visit you in Salem Springs, what would you say, Mitchell, you need to do this and eat this to experience Arkansas, or specifically your area of Arkansas? What do I need to do and what do I need to eat?
Yeah. So my Salem friends will probably get a little mad at me because I'm going to go a little outside the bounds here, although there's plenty to do in Salem Springs. But I think my favorite thing in the area, it's about 40 minutes away, is the Crystal Bridges Art Museum. It's up in Bentonville, and it's phenomenal. Got a lot of great American art, bring in other exhibits. They've got some outdoor sculptures. That's a place I think everyone needs to visit. And so it's a little outside of Silent Springs. We got some fun stuff in town. But I'd say you have to do that if you come to the area. So I'm going to say when you come to the area, we'll go check that out. And then food wise, there's a ton of great food. We always try to like check things out as a family, and we like pizza and Mexican and a lot of different things. But I think one place I'd say, and it's kind of got a funny story behind it, is this Taqueria El Rancho. When my wife and I came down to interview at 𝑠A𝑔𝑒𝑟, we ate there, and it was great. And so a few months later, I was in a facilities committee meeting, and we decided as the few guys on the board and I that were going to lunch, we decided to meet there for lunch. And I ordered a burrito, and they're like, do you want the small, medium, or super? And I was a little hungry, and I thought, well, I mean, super? Sure. And they brought out like 2-foot-long burritos on a plate. I mean, it was like a food for a week kind of thing. And my board members have still not let me live that down. But man, was that thing good like all 3 days that I ate it. So you should come get the super burrito at Taqueria El Rancho. It's fantastic.
Okay. I've seen, it's funny. My wife would say I eat a lot of food, but I'd be one of the ones that would get that and go, oh boy, eyes are way bigger than my stomach for sure. And I'm sure
so much bigger.
How much
bigger.
How much is a super burrito?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it was probably like $15. It was not so obscene that I thought it was massive. I mean, it was a few bucks more than the medium. So you're like, small, medium, large. And it's like small, medium, and feed a family. So, good for Taqueria El Rancho. Yeah. You got to check that out. It's good stuff.
I love it. Well, because this, what are they known for food in Arkansas? What's like the thing? Is there a specific type of barbecue or something like that's an Arkansas type of dish?
I haven't figured that out yet. Like a lot of people like a lot of different things, and yeah. So I'm learning. Actually, everybody's favorite restaurant when I talk to people who have been here for years is always one that's like no longer in business. I'm like, well. That's a weird kind of thing, but
it's not been that good.
Well, yeah, or it's like they have this real niche where it's like I really like Colombian food, and it's like that's great, but there's not a huge population in Arkansas that's like we're going out to eat. That's specifically what I'm looking for, and so I think they struggle that way. But man, there's some good food here, so come check it out.
All right. I'm added to the ever-growing ginormous list of places I need to visit, but I do want to go check out Arkansas and different areas over there because I hear it is beautiful.
It is so beautiful. Lots of outdoor stuff to do.
Love it. Well, as we dive into some of the actual content for today, I know from our pre-interview call, we kind of talked about, schools they're teaching, specifically today, Christian schools, we're talking about teaching, Bible and theology. And I guess let's start with like really simple for this one. So, okay, if school's listening and they're going, okay, teaching Bible and theology. What is the Bible and theology? I'm sure we all know what the Bible. Well, what about theology? What are we talking about when we're talking about those things in a school setting?
Yeah, so I'd say when I talk about theology in a school setting, there's definitely the sense in which we want to make sure that students understand really the core doctrines of the church. What has the church believed since the beginning? And so, doctrines like the Trinity and what does it mean that God became man in the incarnation? Like those are theological ideas that we want to make sure that students are encountering, thinking through, and getting good orthodox teaching on. I'd also say theology kind of comes through the great tradition and the great books. And so as a classical Christian school, we read a lot of old books. It's an intentional part of our education. And so I always tend to encourage the teaching of theology through reading Augustine or Athanasius or Aquinas and people throughout church history as they wrestle with the truths of Scripture. You're really always going back to the Bible, but they're wrestling with that in their own context, and then we can learn how to wrestle with that in our own context today. That's really kind of what I'm thinking when I talk about Bible and theology, make sure that we see those truths not just taught but lived out in specific contexts.
Okay. And I know when we talk about all this, we're talking about, these Christian schools teaching a biblical worldview, Christian formation, and all of these different things. And so obviously, if there's the Christian schools that are listening and going, well, yeah, of course we want to do that. And maybe they think they are doing that, but they might not even know maybe where to start or how to get better at that. So maybe should these schools be trying to create their own like K-12 curriculum to help students with this? Or are there maybe resources that you can share about like, hey, I would check out this place that does press releases or press that prints the different books and curriculum. Like what do you think they should be doing to start to kind of push that forward?
Yeah, I would always start from a big picture of like what in your particular kind of geographical, or even if you have, if you're in an area that's kind of predominantly a specific denomination or background, that might speak to it as well. The places I've been have been a lot more what I'd call ecumenical. There's a lot of different backgrounds, Catholic, not a lot of Orthodox in the areas I've been, but different Protestant denominations. And so there's never been kind of one huge thing. Some areas you're going to have a lot more of one specific discipline or denomination that might make an impact on that. But I'd say starting within your own context, what is our community like? What kind of families do we have at our school? And from there, it becomes important to create a philosophy that says, what are we trying to accomplish? You always want to start from the place where you don't want to replace the church, right? It's not the school's job to replace the church. But the school does want to supplement the work of the church, partner with the church in that work of discipling kids. And from an academic perspective, we're going to be teaching not just Bible and theology through a Christian lens, but we're teaching every discipline through a Christian lens. And so you really can't say, oh, well, we'll be careful in Bible and theology class, but it's cool because history, no big deal. And it's like, well, when you're talking about history, you're talking about the way the church has lived out within societies, secular and Christian and otherwise. And so really do have to start with what are we trying to accomplish? What are our goals? And how do we want to establish that as a school? And from there, then, I think once you understand what are we trying to get to, kind of starting with that end in mind, then you can work backwards and say, how are we going to get there? There are some really good curricula out there. I'm kind of one of those people that likes to work with the people that I have or myself. And, our curriculum is the Bible ultimately. And then if we add those great books, when we talk about theology, we're wrestling with the ideas that are in those. And so I don't tend to use a lot of other curriculum or resources beyond just the Bible and those great books. But there are some really good supplemental aids out there. So smaller schools, areas where you maybe don't have someone who has an academic background in Bible or theology may benefit from some more resources than some other schools. And so there's some things to look at there. But I would really start with that kind of overall philosophy. What do we want our students to graduate with? What do we want them to leave with in terms of kind of biblical literacy and knowledge, their ability to read the scriptures well, and then also the spiritual formation component of that, to me, is huge. Yes, the Bible can be, maybe should be an academic discipline, but it can't ever stop it being merely an academic discipline. It has to also be something that our students learn to read so that they're lifelong readers of the Bible and they're growing in spiritual formation in the likeness of Christ. And so I think that has to be part of the educational goal as a school. We can't just leave that out. So those are some of the things I'd say from a starting point. It's really kind of big picture questions for a school to answer before they start getting into the details of curriculum.
Hey, school success makers, Mitchell here. I just want to take a really quick break from the show to give a big, huge shout out to the Herzog Foundation. I absolutely love the Herzog Foundation. I've been friends and partners with them for a couple years now, but we're bringing it to a whole new level. And I'm excited to share that our very own School Success podcast is now featured on the Herzog Foundation Podcast Network. The Herzog Foundation is a powerhouse of resources designed to support schools like yours, from free training events through the Herzog Foundation Institute to their incredible online news publication, The Lion, and of course, our new podcast, Home. They have everything you need to stay informed and inspired. And if you're dreaming of starting your own Christian school or co-op, don't miss their online course, Schoolbox. It's a fantastic resource to help you get started on the right foot. At School Success, we're proud to partner with the Herzog Foundation to bring you these valuable tools and insights. So visit herzogfoundation.com to explore all they have to offer. Trust me, you won't want to miss out on these amazing opportunities for growth and success. And I love all the people over there, and I know you guys will too. So please go check them out, and you won't be disappointed. Now, back to the show. I know when I visited you guys a couple of years ago, I sat in on one of the seminars by your old boss, Brad, which I'm spacing his last name as I say this. What was his last name? Dolph, thank you. So I remember sitting on one of his, and he was talking about, I think he taught math or geometry or something was one of the things. So he kind of, I never heard it put, the way he worded it that day really just made me excited. And my mind was like spinning in a good way of like, oh my goodness. He said, when we teach, obviously naturally you're teaching the Bible, it's Christian. Okay, we're teaching about the Bible. But then how do you intertwine that into mathematics and into geometry, into all these things? And he explained how he did it. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's really well done and really cool. So those that are listening, because you're going to be able to articulate this way better than I could, what does that look like if we're talking about teaching from a biblical worldview and adding that into every area of education? What does that look like if we're teaching math, if we're teaching different subjects that maybe that wouldn't naturally fit? Maybe we feel like how do you apply that?
Yeah, so I'd say there's probably two ways that I would describe this. One would be one of my favorite ways that Brad would always describe it. So he taught specifically geometry at School of the Ozarks, as well as being head of school. And he would talk about how geometry literally means earth measure. But beyond that, what geometry is really teaching us is not just to measure the earth, but to measure the world. To be the kind of people who can think well, discern, and to look at the world around us. If we think of the world in terms of how the Gospel of John talks about it, for God so loved the world, right? The people of the world that God created. How do we measure that? How do we look at the world around us and be discerning individuals? And so the arts and skills learned in geometry, the discipline of attention, being able to look at something and compare it to something else, all those kinds of skills in geometry are really skills of discernment that we can use for the world. So there's that one sense where there's kind of a direct application. The other sense I would say is kind of fundamentally a theological view, which starts with, if or since God is the creator of all things, then everything comes from God. And since everything comes from God, if we're going to rightly know any one discipline of study, we have to know it in relation to the God who created it. So to talk about natural science, there are truths that atheistic natural scientists discover, right? But those truths are only rightly understood and put into practice if we understand them in relation to the God who created them. And so there's always going to be something fundamentally missing if we can't tie our understanding of natural science back to the creator God. And that's not to say that natural scientists who don't believe in God can't do useful things and are unintelligent. They're brilliant, but they're missing something about that. And so every discipline ultimately should lead us back to God, to wonder, amazement, worship, and praise for who he is and what he's created. And so as students begin to understand that, we can say, okay, so if God creates this harmonious, beautiful world for the design of dwelling with humanity, which is what Scripture's honestly all about, is God's relational presence with his people. If that's what God is all about, then wouldn't we expect there to be harmony within creation, right? The way in which planets move, the way in which we can measure, the way that numbers do phenomenal, beautiful, crazy things. The amount of time you can spend talking about pi, not like cake, but the number pi or the golden ratio are things that could take up hours and hours and hours of exploration and study, and go, how does that keep happening? And there's this beautiful answer behind all of that. And so God's providence over all of human history. I think of Daniel, where it talks about God removes kings and sets up kings. And so much of the story of history is this battle for supremacy, battle for power, trying to work within human civilization and recognize that people are complicated and we don't always get along, and the trials and challenges that arise from that. And at the core of all of that is God superintending all of human history and then entering into that in the incarnation and saying, hey, I'm not just messing around with you up here. I'm going to enter into this and redeem it from the inside. And I just think, what a beautiful picture that theology and scripture teach us, but it's really the crux of all human history. And so whether it's history or civics or even geography, mathematics and sciences, languages, they all, I think, find their core understanding in the activity of a creative God. So that gets me excited.
I love that. Well, so, and I think it's perfect actually segue into one of the other questions I have for you is about, you're leading this school, you got other school leaders that are listening in, and you got these teachers that are at these schools going, okay, I'm excited about this too. And they might have maybe some differing opinions on some different things. So do schools need to have a policy in place for these teachers that are in a school going, hey, like this is what we believe, and like we don't, like there's all those little things, like some of those little hills where like we're not willing to die on type of thing, but then there's the big ones. Should every school have a policy of like, here's how you teach Bible to the students, and don't deviate out of this, because then we start getting to a world where we don't approve of the stuff outside of that? I guess that's a long-winded question for you.
Sure. Yeah, and I think I kind of go back and forth, right? So I'm always a fan of clarity. I might mention this later, but I'm always a fan of clarity. I don't want to be too rigid and rules based. And so some people view policies as rigid and rules based. But I always go back to G.K. Chesterton in Orthodoxy. He talks about, as he's exploring Christianity before he comes back to the faith, he's talking about rule and order. And he says he realizes that rule and order gave room for good things to run wild. And he tells this story later in the book about these, it's a weird thought experiment, but imagine this really high island in the middle of the sea, and there's children playing on it. And when there's a fence around it, they run around and play and have a wonderful time. But when the fence is removed and someone comes back, they're all huddled up in the center, terrified. And if you think about that, it's like when there's a fence, when there's boundaries, when there's some kind of parameter and order, you can run around and have a great time and play. But when that is removed, like going outside the boundary of that is dangerous. And as much as like an island high up in the sea sounds a little silly, we would know how dangerous that would be. I think to go outside the bounds of Christian orthodoxy, to say, I know the church has always said this, but what if God weren't this way? We're in far more danger than falling off of a cliff. And so we do want there to be parameters in place. I just don't want there to be rigid rules, so it shouldn't be like a 20-page document or a 15 line items that you shall or shall not. It's not a 10 commandments kind of list either. I really start from the idea of, let's start with, we're going to teach the Bible. We're going to teach from a primary doctrine standpoint. That is, this is what the church has held in agreement since the beginning. So things like the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed can control that for us. We can say, whether you're Orthodox or Catholic, Protestant, of any denomination, we hold that God is triune. We hold that Jesus is the eternal Son of God become man. These are things that we believe. And that holds together kind of those boundaries for us that we're not going to go beyond. When it comes to secondary doctrine, things like, well, how and when should you be baptized? Or, what is the Lord's Supper? Or what's the order of salvation? What does predestination mean? I've taken the approach of advising teachers to, when those topics come up, because I think they will, right? If we're trying to teach students to read the Bible well, and you're reading Ephesians and it says, in love, he predestined us for adoption as sons through Jesus Christ, a good student's going to be like, well, what does he mean by predestining us in love? And you can't be like, we're not going to talk about that. I mean, you got to say something to the effect of, yeah, let's address that. Here's what it must mean in this context. It means that God's involved in this, that God is deciding, God's initiating, but the manner in which we think predestination, for instance, is happening here's a few different ways that the church has tried to answer that. And so we take a multiple views approach and say, some people say this, and here's why. Some people would say this, and here's why. Here's some of the, if you know, here's some of the merits of each of these positions. But we encourage then our students to go back and say, hey, that's a great question. Go ask that of your parent, or go ask that of your pastor, right? Those are the primary spiritual authorities in a student's life. First of all, their parents. Second of all, their pastor. The school can help. And sometimes parents come back and say, hey, I don't know how to answer that question. Will you help talk me through it? And by all means, like at that point, we can happily advise parents. We want those conversations to be happening. But I think it does help students understand. Plus, it's training in discipline of dialectic and logic, asking the right questions, pursuing them to their conclusions. One of my favorite ways is really just good pedagogy at all, which is when a student asks a question, just ask them a question back. That was one of Jesus's favorite things. And I just go, hey, we're supposed to imitate Jesus. This is how he did it. So if they ask a question, be like, well, why do you think? Or what do you think about this? And, but yeah, sometimes those topics come up and you're like, I did not see that coming. As much as you can be prepared, I try to help teachers. And so this summer, as we were preparing to offer a class in the New Testament, we were going to spend a lot of time in the Gospel of John. I met with one of our teachers who was going to be doing 7th and 8th grade Bible. And we sat down and we're like, what are the landmines in the Gospel of John? What do we expect that they're going to ask? And we preemptively discussed those, and here's how we're going to respond. And there were a couple others that popped up, but for the most part, we were on the right track. They asked the questions we thought they would, and we had responses for it. So
that's awesome. And I love, you mentioned like the students asking these questions, because that's what, as a school, I think if you're doing a really good job, you're going to get those questions because they feel comfortable asking those questions. And, you know, I know growing up in the church I grew up in, I did not want to be the kid that raised their hand asking a question or clarifying. I felt like I was the idiot, you know? And so I'm like, I'm not asking anything, you know? I don't want to draw any attention to myself. And so I look back and go, gosh, I wish they had built, and this is just church. This isn't like I was homeschooled. So the church, I was like, I did not feel comfortable doing that. And I think it's because the precedent that was set was sit down and listen. This is kind of what it is. And I didn't feel like they didn't set that to go, hey, let us know if you have questions. And they were happy about it. I feel like I would have been scolded for asking a dumb question.
Yeah, so it's so hard. Never want to kill someone's inquisitiveness.
No. And man, we try and be really careful. Like we have a 5-year-old, and whenever he asks a question, it could be a really silly question. And you're like, I don't want to be like, what kind of question is that? I don't want to do that because, man, I don't want him thinking that. I want him to continue to ask me questions. And by golly, as he gets older, I know you are the same way with your older kids of like, I don't want him going to his friends for that question. I want him to be comfortable to ask me. So I think the same thing applies with the students. I don't want them seeking that out somewhere that they're going to get the world's answer or the wrong answer. You want that to come through the school. Yeah. So I love it that you've mentioned that, and that's something you guys are focusing on. So,
and I think that's why it's so important too, Mitchell, for us to direct them back to their parents and their pastor, right? We're not saying I can't answer that. We're saying, here's what I can say about that, but I'm not ultimately your spiritual authority. So I'm not going to try to direct you towards some particular view that I might have, but we are pointing them back to the right place to ask those questions as well. And so, yeah, it's never I can't answer that or I won't answer that. It's always redirecting. And it's good when parents come back and they're like, is it your fault that my kid's asking me theological questions? And I go, I hope so.
Our neighbor next door, she'll, because I was a youth pastor for a few years, and she, when the kids have a question, it stumps her. She's like, go ask Pastor Mitchell next door. And they'll come over and ask me, and it'll be like, I'm like, that's a really good question. And I'll answer it to the best of my ability too. But I know I would love your thoughts on this, but I've been using, I know you would never want to do this in the classical school or even a school in general, but I've been using AI to really help me actually like dive into scripture more.
Oh,
and so I'll get stuck on a verse, and I've been going through Proverbs this last month. And so I've been like, get on a verse and go, what? And instead of just Googling the verse, going to find a column about it, I'll go to like ChatGPT and I'll be like, what does this mean? And like read it. And now I'm like, not that I'm like preaching about it after that, but I'm going, oh, that makes sense. And it kind of explain it. And then you tell ChatGPT, can you explain this to me as literally, I'll say this sometimes. Can you explain this to me like you're talking to a child? because I just need it brought down on a level that I can actually comprehend it and understand it.
Yeah.
That's actually really helped me this like last few months of like when I get stuck on something of understanding what's the context that we're talking about. It gives me exactly what I want instead of me trying to search through Google to find somebody that I can trust. What are your thoughts though on kids even using AI to help understand something? I know that's a slippery slope. So
Yeah, no, it does feel that way sometimes. It can be a little bit dangerous to, hand them a tool that they're not ready for. And so AI can be a little tricky that way. It could become a crutch. It could become something that's feeding them false information. But something from a teacher perspective to say, I'm struggling to get through. How do I explain this to me like I'm a child? Sometimes just prompts new ideas. I'd always love being able to do that with a colleague or a friend, but sometimes you just can't connect with someone in the moment, and there may be some opportunities for that. So I've tried to think through a little bit more, like where could there be opportunities to, helpfully engage with what our culture's offering us with that. And then where are there areas where we're just like, hey, we don't need that.
Yeah.
It's tricky. It is. But I mean, that's part of what Bible and theology is forcing us to do, is to take the truths of Scripture and apply them to our day. And it's like, okay, what does the Bible say about AI? Even though it doesn't talk about it directly, it probably has some things to say for us, and might be a fun project.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good.
What does AI say about what the Bible says about AI?
You know what? I'll ask. I can ask it later. I'll see.
There you
go. So probably like the last question on all the stuff we're talking about here, but if we're those that are listening, for how do you train teachers on all of this? Like we talked about policy, but like the goal of like, okay, we're training them. Is there a specific thing for a school going, we really want to train our teachers on how to do this? Is there maybe some stuff online they could do, or a couple books that could read, or maybe an online program? Like where do you kind of suggest for teachers of Christian schools to learn how to properly do this?
Hey, I just want to take a really quick break from the podcast to highlight one of our amazing partners and sponsors, ClassReach. If you're a new school administrator or founder and are struggling to keep up with all the hassles of planting a new school, like collecting tuition, communicating with parents, or handling student data, then you need ClassReach. ClassReach is the all-in-one software that helps with everything from admissions and tuition to classroom management and parent communications. Sign up for a free consultation with one of their school specialists and see how ClassReach can help your school grow today. You guys can check them out online, classreach.com. They are a kingdom-minded company, and I love their leadership team there. I've become friends with a lot of them. They truly are a great company. I support them and I love them, and you guys will love them too. Check them out at classreach.com. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, it probably depends on the age. So, I think in K6, you're looking a lot more at the biblical literacy part, giving them a lot of scripture to memorize, telling them a lot of Bible stories, helping them understand that. As they start to get a little bit older, you can ask a few more questions and help them dig deeper. But you're really just kind of filling them with Bible knowledge. I've talked to a lot of people, especially university professors, who are just like, I can't believe how little the general college student these days knows about the Bible. When you're like, oh, well, Abraham, and they're like, who? You're like, wow, okay, that used to be a given. So I think there are some things with biblical literacy that are really a struggle. So the more that we can just kind of ingrain those stories in kids is really helpful. So with your K6 teachers, a lot of times you're really just teaching them to tell the stories, help students navigate kind of the simple questions of character, plot, historical timing. Where does this fit? And then most of the questions at that age are not going to fit within the time and scope of the class. And it's really easy to say, hey, why don't you go ask your mom and dad that question? That would be really great. And I think that's a little bit easier to train. And then they're like, oh, good, because I don't want to answer these deep theological questions. Once you start to get into middle school, especially when you're training them to ask good questions, with classical schools, especially when you're teaching them formal logic, now they're starting to like almost ask the questions sometimes as a challenge and sometimes out of genuine inquisitiveness or curiosity, like I want to know. Now you start to get to the point where you probably want to train your teachers on the curriculum. And I don't necessarily mean like what books or resources you're using. It could still just be the Bible. Like I mentioned with the Gospel of John, if we're going to spend a lot of time on the Gospel of John, as much as possible, training people in advance to go, okay, here's probably what we're looking at. People are going to have some questions about this, that, or the other. For instance, in the Gospel of John, one of the big ones is not so much maybe a theological idea as you get to John 8 and there's these big brackets around the woman caught in adultery story. And you're like, somebody's going to look at that and be like, why are there brackets here? And then you're like, oh, we need to be ready to answer the question of why is this not in the originals, but it's in our Bible kind of question. So that's one that you can anticipate ahead of time because you know you're going to study the Gospel of John. So if you keep it kind of curriculum based in the sense of we're going to read the Gospel of John, where might there be some hang-ups? Let's talk through those issues. I think you can get about, I don't know, at least 75%, maybe as much as 90% of student questions you can anticipate ahead of time and train teachers on. And you can have those conversations together to figure out where everyone is and then go, well, here's kind of in a unified way the way we want to approach this. Because you're not caught off guard. Oh, I didn't know that was in the Gospel of John. Well, you knew you were going to study John. Let's get ahead of it. That's probably the main thing, just staying ahead of the students a little bit to know it's coming. If you're just like, oh, we're in John 8 today, let's start reading. Oh, I didn't know that was there. Then you're in trouble. But yeah, so I think that's a big part. But it's really difficult, I think, to train this. Some people are just incredibly gifted. I mean, we've seen those people who just like, wake up one day and God has gifted them with teaching. And you're like, how did you know to do that? And they're like, I don't know. It's just what teachers do, right? And you're like, what's what good teachers do? But most of us don't know how to do that. We had to learn. Some people just have that gift. Other people, you have to really kind of practice, shape, coach them through. It's a lot of coaching. Here's kind of what this looks like. And, but administrators, other teachers can't be in the room all the time to go, hey, you did that pretty well, but here's how we would do it better. So as much as you can have those conversations in some kind of training session without the students there, and hey, how would you talk through this? Then coach them through that. Then they get better with each successive encounter, I think. You just can't possibly know every difficult question that's going to come up in a Bible class. And you can't know every theological topic 5 topics deep where you go, oh, it could be this or this or this. And here's all the reasons why. And I went to a lot of further education in biblical studies. And there are still days that I'm like, I have no idea how to answer that question. So there's just no way someone could know all the stuff in advance. But I should be able to know what I'm going to encounter in the Gospel of John that day and anticipate most of the questions. And that's really the main training.
And anytime I'm talking with students when I'm leading at church or something, it's like, man, I'm okay not knowing the answer of a question either.
Right.
To go like, but my answer always when a student asks me something, I go, ooh, that's a really good question. I don't know. Give me a week. Let me find out and I'll tell you. And I'll tell you, because then you get at least an opportunity to come back to them. Obviously at a school, they're going to be like, hey, I'll tell you tomorrow. Give me a day if there is that one crazy curveball of a question. Yeah. But I
still ask for a week, even if I'm going to see him the next day. I say, give me a week because I want to take it seriously. And now that requires the discipline to follow up. Otherwise, students are like, oh, you're just using this as a cop-out.
Yep.
But when students have asked me those questions, then I go, give me a week and let me come back on that. And then to revisit it on your own in some study and then come back within a week and go, here's what I found. They really appreciate that.
They do. I know I do. When somebody, if I've ever asked my pastor or somebody, like one of my old pastors that actually used to be my boss when I was at the church I worked at, he's my mentor. And so we talk once a month and I just I literally have my ed questions note on my phone and I just keep adding the ones throughout the month that I'm going to ask him. And I love asking him and I'll sometimes say one and he'll go, huh, I've never gotten that one before. He goes, and you kind of feel good. You're like, oh my gosh, good. I'm not alone that I don't know what these things are. And so actually, yeah, if you tell a student that, I feel like that also makes them feel good as well. Going, oh, I feel like I asked a good question that they don't actually know. I'm not alone here, and just a great way to connect back with them later. If you remember, like you just said, if like you forget, then that's not going to be a good rapport. But
And that's probably one of the more important things to teach teachers is it's okay to not have all the answers. If every question is I don't know, then they're going to question your competency. But if you have a lot of answers, but then are also willing to say I don't know, but I'll go look at that, you're demonstrating for them the same habits of learning we want them to have. Hey, I don't know that, but I want to know that, so I'm going to go do some research, do some reading to try to learn that.
yeah.
And the skills that we're teaching them in school are going to provide them with what they need to go do that on their own. But as much as we can model that for them in the present, it's really valuable. So that's what I've seen. My favorite teachers were like that. Other teachers that I've really admired as I've worked with them have done that. They're willing to say, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. And then I watch them follow up and do that. And students are like, cool, you actually did that. Sometimes they'll be like, oh, I didn't even remember I asked that. I don't know if that's true or not, but even better if they did forget, because now you brought it back to mind and you showed a willingness to go above and beyond what they even were going to put the effort in on. So
I'm sure
that wins a lot of favor.
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of students who are like, oh, dang it. I was just asking that to be a smart butt or whatever. I am like, I didn't think
I
you
was trying to
actually
waste time. I didn't. Well, you wasted more time because I went and did some research. But
and now you learned something. We both learned something on this. So
that's it. Yeah.
So as we wrap up today's episode, I always love to end with the same question for everybody, kind of, and it can be on the content that we've talked about or just something else. But if you had to share a piece of advice with the school leaders listening, what would that piece of advice be for you?
Yeah, so this is my first year as head of school. And to me, the lesson that I keep learning over and over is about the importance of clarity, communication, and just being clear about expectations, clear about where we want to head, clear about who we are as a school, and what we're trying to accomplish, and then clear about what's the next step to move there. And so I've been having meetings with my admin team and working through those kinds of things and saying, how do we do a better job of understanding who we are and where we want to go and how we're going to get there? And it's just helping so many things kind of come into place. And I think the same thing goes with what we're talking about with training teachers is be clear about, here's our policy. I'm not trying to micromanage this. I'm not trying to put a ton of rules in place. I'm trying to provide you with the boundaries to where everything within this fence, it's a place for good things to run wild. That's the clarity I want you to know. Here's where the line is, and here's why it's here. Now go and do what you're really good at. I don't want them to feel like every moment is a landmine that they might step on. I want them to feel like, this is a weird analogy, right? But it's not like every step is a landmine they might land on. It's more like an electrified fence. It's like, we don't want to go and touch that thing, but anywhere within here, right, we can have a great time and we can learn. And, teachers who feel like they have to be careful on everything they say and everywhere they step, they're going to be less effective than the teacher who goes, okay, you're confident in me. I understand the boundaries and I can work within those. It's a lot better relationship. And the students get to be the beneficiaries of that. So really every aspect of the school, I think, benefits from that kind of clarity. It takes a lot of work, I'm noticing, but it's well worth the effort for successful schools, which is what you're all about, Mitchell.
Amen. Love it. Well, Kyle, thank you for taking time out of your day to hop on the podcast, teach myself, teach our listeners a little bit about what you're well versed in. I love that you're finishing up your first year. So congratulations on finishing up your first year in a few months.
You.
And I hope many, many more for you. And hopefully I can make it out to Arkansas one day. We can go grab a super burrito together.
That's right.
And have a good old time.
There you go.
But man, thank you for your years of just obviously educating yourself to be able to take that important to more students and more people with your knowledge and how God's blessed you. I love seeing that. So just thank you for all of that and continue to do what you're doing. I'm a big fan of yours.
Hey, thanks, Mitchell. Back at you, man. Big fan of you.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Kyle for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love what him and his school are doing over there in Arkansas, and I'm wishing them nothing but the best as they continue to grow and educate the next generation that's coming behind us. And as always, I'm hoping you guys are able to take at least one thing away from today's episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Now, there's, of course, I mention these regularly, our free 3 resources that you guys should be tuning into and checking out if you're not doing that already. First one is, of course, what you're listening to right now, the podcast, weekly episodes dropping every Monday. Make sure you're coming back and getting those every single week. And if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe, completely free to do so. And if you love our content, we'd love a 5-star review, but these are coming every week. We want to make sure you're not missing out on those. The second resource is on our website, schoolsuccessmakers.com. That's schoolsuccessmakers.com. Top right-hand corner, there is a button currently right there. That is the School Success Report. It's a weekly email we send right to your inbox. It has some different articles our team has put together to make you more successful. We do some teacher shout outs and some fun things in there as well. So make sure you're getting that completely free, of course. And then last but not least is our Facebook community called School Success Makers. I'm personally in there and would love to see you in there as well. There's a few other 100 different educators inside of that group. And it's all about building community so you can ask questions, share some insight, and connect with others that are in there. That is what it is for. All right, so that's all I got for you guys today, and we will be back here next week with another awesome guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Herzog Foundation.